She's president-elect of our club and a Paul Harris Fellow. Jean?
Thank you, President Julie. BC, before COVID, if you happen to be cruising through the Mall St. Matthews or Oxmoor Mall and step into AFM Threads, it's an upscale boutique for men and women, you've stepped into Tawana Bain's world. Or BC, before COVID, if you happen to be cruising down 4th Street and stepped into a lovely restaurant and lounge called Encore, and in Louisville style, it used to be the old Cunningham's, across the street from the Palace Theater. You stepped into Tawana Bain's world. Those are a few of the many ventures Tawana Bain has founded. She was born in upstate New York, graduated with a BA in French communications and a minor in computer science. And then she went on to achieve oral and written proficiency in French communications at l'Institut du Touraine in Tours, France. Je suis désolée, Tawana, je n'ai pas parlé bon français.
C'est très bien.
Yes. In 2017, she founded the Derby Diversity Business Summit, an event held Derby Week in collaboration with Churchill Downs, designed to drive innovation strategies to attract diverse consumers while promoting the best-in-class diverse business leaders within the executive workforce and global supply chain. And she's featured in the June edition of Tops Magazine, and she's continuing to conduct all of her ventures, retail, restaurant, and business seminars virtually during the COVID pandemic. Please welcome Tawana Bain.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jean. And thank you for everyone that is here today. It was definitely tough with Business First. They had some amazing women that I was looking forward to hearing, and then found myself having to speak. That bio sounds absolutely amazing. With everything, we know we have our professional lives, and then we have the story on how we got there. So I'd like to also give you all a glimpse into my background and my story to help you understand how I've arrived and why I work so hard at the work that I currently do today. The first thing that I want to say, people say, what makes you qualified to speak on race? I like to think that I have a PhD in experience. Number one, I'm Black. Number two, I have 2 Black sons. 3, I have a white significant other. 4, I've lived and traveled around the world, fellowshipping with other races. And 5, I have put in the work to understand, not just from my lens, but from the lens of many. My backstory, I was raised by a single mother, 2 sisters in upstate New York. In the grades between 1st and 2nd grade, I was in the urban suburban program, where I was bused from the inner city to a predominantly white school. The neighborhood that my mother lived in at the time with the 9th, 8th grade education were the projects and viewed as crime infested and unsafe. That neighborhood was some joyous memories that I spent with what I'd like to think is a community of a melting pot. I was able to stay out and hang late into the wee hours of the evening. I always felt safe. I enjoyed my community. Today, that community no longer exists. My mother then relocated permanently to the suburbs my 3rd grade year, and I had my first experience of what racism actually was. I was in the lunch line in the cafeteria, and I had asked for a different side item, and the older white woman that was serving used the N-word. It was the first time that I had heard the word, and I didn't even know what the word had meant. And so once I learned what the word had meant, it had changed my views of how different I was. I had stopped believing that my Black was beautiful. And by the age of 10, not only did I not believe my Black was beautiful, but I had very little interaction with the Black culture outside of my family because my mother had relocated to an area where it was predominantly white. The beauty of growing up in this predominantly white neighborhood is that for whatever reason, somehow all of the neighbors in that community understood that we were the only Black family. I had the very good fortune of them being very mindful of that and treated us as though we were part of their community. And so during that time, as I was growing up and having very little interaction with the Black culture, my own views of the world also began to shape. But I never forgot about that experience in the lunch line. I watched my mother, who had that ninth grade education, begin to go back to school and apply for specific jobs that she was overlooked for, which then caused her to pause school for a little while and work 3 jobs. She was a cashier at a Lowe's. She also served as a janitor, and she worked online at a Taco Bell. My mother's absence left room for me to, turn the inch that she'd given me into a mile. And in my early teen years, rebellion ensued. By middle school, my now predominantly white community school district had adopted the urban suburban program in that area, and many of the children from the inner city were now attending the school with me. I was not well received by my Black peers, an important point that I want to touch on later. I did not speak, dance, enjoy the music they were familiar with because it was no longer within the confines of how I was raised. Nor did I understand their lived experiences. I was coined the classic Oreo, or what some might coin today, an uppity Negro. My mother's absence left room for me to turn the inch that she gave a mile for into leaving and struggling and fighting within my own home. My fellow classmates and the struggle that I had with them caused me to also view the world very different. I was going through a battle for acceptance, causing a major identity crisis. Here I am, a Black girl raised within white culture and stuck between who I am supposed to be and who many thought that I was. I ended up leaving home at the age of 14. I became a teen mom. I finished high school and made a very last minute decision to attend college. My first job after college, I'll never forget, white female, Cassie, blonde haired, blue eyes, adorable. Her and I were in the same orientation together. Obviously, I mentioned she was white. She was also sharp, sharp as a whip, reminded me a lot of myself. So I took an immediate like to her. We never became close friends though. And while I could never put my finger on it, there was always an awkwardness when there was a conversation about after work or weekend plans. Cassie and I were extremely competitive. Sometimes she won, sometimes I did. And I just remember us always talking about, climbing the corporate ladder together. And I recall one day walking into our boss's office with full of confidence, with a desire to take on more at work and my proposal for how I'd accomplish it. And my boss looked up, a bit surprised that I'd showed up unannounced, and was really attentive as I spoke. And after I had done my pitch, and I was so really expecting his response of let's figure out how to do this. And I remember him saying, Tawana, you're fresh out of college, and that career path would take about 10 years. A few weeks later, after really just thinking about all that he had said, I wanted to share my thoughts with Cassie, but I had noticed that she had been absent from her cubicle, which was adjacent to mine. And after, several days, I thought, there's no way that, she's still sick, but we had never exchanged personal contact information. So I wasn't able to check on her. One night while working late and heading to my car, I actually bumped into Cassie, which, shocked me quite a bit. And she was sharing the news about how she had been promoted. Not just any promotion, but actually tasked with the very task I had pitched to my boss just a few weeks earlier. She was fortunate enough to be invited to a holiday party at her boss's home, where she too had the opportunity to spend time pitching him the suggestions about how to make the organization more competitive. And needless to say, left the job, applied somewhere else, and received a position with that was with a design firm. It was owned by a family of immigrants from Yugoslavia. I beat out 3 white males with more experience for the job. But unfortunately, I didn't last. I lasted maybe a year and a half because I didn't have the network to build the book of business. And so, defeated, I remember deciding to spend the evening with a glass of wine and trying to sort out my life. And while I was cashing out, I was ahead of a white man, dressed down, a little rough around the edges, and there was a white cashier. And she did not ask me for ID. I purchased my wine and I was exiting when I heard the white man behind her or behind me being asked for ID. And I left out of that store And my life would then go on to understand the complexities of our world as it relates to race, against race, race within your own community, socioeconomics, and the systems that are designed, unfortunately, that we've all inherited, that make it more difficult for some and easier for others. And so with that, I'd like to dive in because I think it's important that you understand not just the accolades of what makes me experience to talk about this topic, but also my personal experiences throughout life that has also shaped my views and why I am so passionate about the work that I'm doing. So with that, I'm going to attempt to share my screen and hope that technology is on my side today. And if you can see my screen, please do let me know. So yes, fantastic. So as Jean and he had mentioned about, you know, the various business ventures that I have, to give you all some understanding, you know, one might ask, you know, why so much, you know, why are you doing that? Well, in 2016, we had the misfortune of losing a major client where I had to lay off over 20 people. I had started my business with $4,000 in back child support from my son's father. That's a conversation for another day. And so the thought of having placed all my eggs in one basket and seeing my world begin to crumble before me, I made the decision to never again place them all in one basket. And so I decided to diversify my portfolio and recruited leaders to oversee them, report up to me, so that I could do what I thought was protecting myself against a disaster. Only for COVID-19 to hit, right? And realize that even the best of plans sometimes don't work out the way that we intend. During this past few months, I have seen the world very much so like I saw throughout my journey of growing up, both socioeconomics, race, and one of the things that was most profound to me is the disparity of longevity, sustainable, perpetual institutions that are designed specifically to right the wrongs of the past and to invest specifically in racial equity and economic justices. And so with that, you know, we had been working through our diversity initiative, the Derby Diversity Business Summit, to launch a nonprofit. But for whatever reasons, the timing was just not right. So we've been working on it for 2 years. And then suddenly God said, now is the time. And so that is how JEDI actually launched. It was through civil unrest and COVID-19. And I'd like to explain to you a little bit more of the why and why now. Racial inequality and civil unrest events clearly across the nation have caused organizations, individuals seeking ways to get involved, take action so that we can try to reduce the impact on our mental health, business interruptions, relationships, overall quality of life. And organizations are collectively committing billions of dollars to address systemic issues in the Black community. We have an opportunity to direct those investments in a strategic and sustainable way or risk history repeating itself. I want to stop here for a moment before I dive into this slide because one would ask, well, aren't there many nonprofits that are out here doing work? Sure there are. Something that's a little different about JEDI is that JEDI, while we are focusing on the Black community specifically for the next 5 years, it is modeled very similarly to DDBS. We understand that there are other marginalized groups, and because we are looking at JEDI expanding as a global organization, we want to position ourselves to be able to address those needs in other areas as they arrive. The other thing that I think is really important to point out, and we're in Kentucky, so I have a few examples that I will give, is first, Fund for the Arts is a great example of an organization that has existed over years and being able to help thrive the arts community. By them having a sustainable model to continue making investments, we have noticed that community expand, them having the ability to continue to fund organizations year after year, causing, resulting instability in their operations and their infrastructure. I'd also like to bring up the example of the Gaines Foundation. The Gaines Foundation started off with somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 some odd million dollars. Over time, they now have in excess of 120 million, where they are able to continually invest in projects that were specifically designed for their organization. that business model allows sustainable investments to be made as opposed to one-time checks that are written in hopes that the gesture was enough. So now I want to dive into this slide, but we're all human. We are all the same. Do Blacks and whites really have different needs? And so I'd invite you to look through a different lens and instead ask, how are we different? I like to use the example of our hair and lighting with photography. Blacks have different hair texture, thus requires different products to ensure it grows. And while there are stylists of all backgrounds who can style Black hair, the method of caring for it is different. Blacks are more likely to demand flash. When you're with your white girlfriends, of all my Black sisters on here, we'll tell them in a heartbeat, especially if it's dark, turn the flash on. Because without that flash, we understand that the details in our pigment, the beauty, is lost in dark spaces. So while these things are not bad because they're different, they are different. And therefore, there are certain needs that are different. And so when we look at JEDI, why an organization that is Black founded and predominantly Black led, is because we understand that programs and the way in which certain people go about looking at solving complex problems may be a little different. Again, doesn't make it bad. What is our mission? Our mission is to serve as a worldwide giving choice for racial equity and economic justice initiatives. Yes, our foundation is Black founded, predominantly Black led, and we want to create generational wealth to address present and future needs in the Black community and give creative and well thought out grant making that lives on perpetually. We are a 501c3 nonprofit foundation, and we officially spun off from the Derby Diversity and Business Summit this past June to further the work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We started that back in 2017 with a specific emphasis right now on the Black community. And so DDBS will now become annual programming of JEDI, and as I mentioned, 100% Black founded. And I continue to bring that up because while it seems like we're not reinventing the wheel, it's still a phenomenon that if we're able in Kentucky to launch a foundation that lives on for generations to come with the intent of ensuring that first, Black community and then other marginalized communities have a source that is directly tied to their types of initiatives, is groundbreaking. Funding sources and tools. You'll see our E and EJ 365. That is the proprietary method in which we're going about addressing racial equity and economic justice. We're looking for individuals, corporations, government, private and public foundations, and we're using all sorts of different vehicles: payroll deduction giving programs, state fund allocation, capital granting, annual giving, major gifts, membership, corporate gift matching. Our donation approach is designed to empower organizations from the top down, but for it to be a collective effort. And what I mean by collective effort is it's important to understand that Black communities and other marginalized communities are not a charity. We're not looking for handouts. We want to collectively invest in our communities. And so providing us tools and vehicles and educating within your organization on how their dollars collectively, from the top to the bottom, are addressing these issues will really make them feel as though they have a seat at the table and are given a voice. The other thing that is really important is that right now we've heard a lot in our community. Some say it's unfounded. I often believe where there's smoke, there's fire. You know, opportunity zones, I do believe, can be very healthy for the Black community. Unfortunately, what many don't understand is that there's a lot of promises that are made early on that Blacks will be hired, Blacks will remain, they will be provided housing, and oftentimes after the promise and the shake hand happens and the work begins, a lot of that is out the window, and then gentrification ensues. And so who is most vulnerable to displacement? Those that were in the community that don't have the means to fight back. And so JEDI would like to serve as a role, as a convener for ensuring that the work gets done, but there are people on the front line making sure that those in those communities are never displaced and that the promise is upheld. Our current projects for investment, we're looking at looking through a 360-degree lens. So nonprofits, startups, for-profits, arts and creatives, institutions. We understand that this effort will be ongoing because it's going to take years to really truly address the inequities around our country. We mentioned that, or I mentioned earlier that our aim is to reach globally, but we do understand the heavy lift, and so we're starting nationally. So the overarching umbrella for our campaign is the My America Reimagined, but we understand that to truly make this successful, it needs to be grassroots, and we need to make it feel is within state to state that it is their own. And so because it started in Kentucky around the song, My Old Kentucky Home, because of the history that that song brings to our state, we've decided to have the entire campaign across the state or the country to follow after that theme. So we are also launching in Minnesota as well as Georgia with My Minnesota Home Reimagined and My Georgia Home Reimagined. You'll notice that we chose the 3 hot areas intentionally to focus our efforts. So why Kentucky was the best place? You know, obviously I live here. We've been doing the work here for the last 3 years, but there's some other things that's really important to point out. You know, Kentucky has a rich pool of resources of private and public employers within major industries. Here are just a few examples of if we all rallied and said, you know, if we made contributions collectively, Black, white, Hispanic, Latina, gay, straight, disabled, or differently abled, young, older, with just a 20% impact is the sort of dollars that we could begin to flow into establishing the Corpus for Jedi. Why is that important? Well, typically one of the reasons why many foundations are able to be propped up and to survive is because someone wealthy traditionally leaves a sum of money that allows them to establish its corpus. Well, because of all that has happened over the years with the Black community, that wealth has been just damaged. And so where does it exist and how do we create it and how do we get creative to build up a corpus so that we can have an entity that is addressing these issues collectively across our nation and then ultimately around the world. Our value proposition: community engagement, economic empowerment, supply chain development, workforce development. Many people would say, well, that sounds extremely corporate. How does that belong within a nonprofit? Well, the reality is that you need the community. You need the community on your side. You need grassroots individuals. We need ambassadors in Georgia and Minnesota. And then once we take on Texas and once we take on Mexico, we need them. We need economic empowerment, right? If we're not empowering this Black community, what's happening with these dollars? What is the impact that is actually happening? Supply chain development. Well, if you're going to make investments and you want to build up the Black community, well, you need Black contractors that are at the table in order to do that. Otherwise, the Black supply chain is not at the table. And then ultimately workforce development, ensuring that as we are investing into Black-led initiatives and projects, that we are hiring individuals to serve on committees who do look like those that they're investing in, because again, we do have differences that do require a different set of needs. And when you place individuals over the decision-making power of whether or not that funding is made or not made, that better understands the needs, I'd like to tie that back to a Black woman's hair or lighting for a photograph, they have a different view in how to go about ensuring that that funding happens. Ultimately, our goal is to ensure that that results all in commercial development, leadership advancement, entrepreneurship acceleration, wealth creation, and job creation. And I think it's important to point out that those that are our white allies or our Hispanic allies that understand the Black lived experience, then absolutely can be involved in making decisions. So I think it's really important to understand that. And I think it's fair enough to say that if you come to the table and say, if you can say, I don't feel comfortable speaking about race because I really didn't understand what a problem it was, then I think it's fair to assume then you're probably not qualified to make decisions around race as it relates to providing funding or not. I want to talk a little bit about our governance right now. We launched this with, there's been some others that have joined, but I do want to point out that we've got a structure with a first tier with voting, as well as a grant review committee that is also within our first tier. And I want to point out our vice president, who's also a member of Rotary, Nikki Lanier. Nikki, I like to think of as someone that has the ability to float within so many different spaces and really be a beacon of unity, not only outside of the Black community, but also within the Black community. And I applaud her ability to stay fluid and unbiased and more fixated on addressing the overall objective at hand. We also have a non-voting second tier investment with 5 corporate seats. We are building this organization with national representation. And so while some of those names are not here, it is important to point out that in order for us to truly be national, that we needed to have representation from across the country. Our team structure for the organization, many of these roles that you see here, we inherited by good fortune because of the work that we've been doing over the last several years with the Derby Diversity and Business Summit. Right now, I am serving as lead. And we do have an office manager that is actually part-time. Our goal and other reasons for funding is to place this individual in full-time capacity. We want to bring on an analyst part-time. That position is not filled, as well as the current admin person that we have. They are part-time. We'd like to make them full-time. We do not currently have an IT and development person. We do need that because of the different technologies to speak to different corporate allies. And then we have a creative person that is currently an independent contractor. What is our schedule? Right now, we are in year 1. We are building the corpus, our infrastructure, and looking at ways in which we can bring in or allow people to submit programs. So right now, that is being done manually. So additional dollars that we're looking for is to raise the funding needed to streamline that process. During year 1, as building our corpus, we're looking for corporate donors, individual donors, and as well as working on our operations and infrastructure. And in year 2, really increasing our work around community engagement, memberships, and beginning to review project proposals and begin to reinvest. And so with that, that is the overview about JEDI. If you all are looking for immediate ways to get involved, I know that we want to take time and allow for questions. So the best way to learn more, DDBS this year is going virtual. We have changed our theme to Pivot Champs. And so you can learn more about what we're doing with pivotchamps.com. We have 20 host cities around the country that are mobilized in helping us talk economic empowerment as well as unity. And then, of course, JEDI, donations, partnerships, resources are all welcome. Thank you.
Jean, do you want me to do the Q&A portion, or do you want to unmute her, Alyssa? Thank you so much, Tawana. I wish we were in the room so you could hear the applause that we would all be giving you for your excellent presentation. Thank you so much. Jean is so talented. So when she's on the stage, I'm going to go to the back and let her handle the Q&A. If there's many remarks. So Jean, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, great, thanks. Let me start with this question. It's from Dan Hartledge. Tawana, Dan says, I live about 100 yards from your restaurant Encore. As a downtown resident, I'm very concerned about downtown's future. As a downtown business owner, how concerned are you? Lots of business operators downtown are clinging to life. What are your thoughts?
You know, it's interesting. It goes back to, the lens that you're looking through. So while we were just getting ready to open and the protests began, I thought, oh my gosh, here we go again. But again, we're as comfortable with what we know. We're as comfortable with what we know. And so for the business owners that are downtown that are uncomfortable with what is going on, my recommendation is I would really encourage you to begin reaching out to some of these organizations to understand why they're protesting. And if you have a business, Can they patronize your business? I have spent this entire week opening up our restaurant to the protesters because I explained to them, you guys have hindered my ability to make money. So I would really like for you to patronize my business. And we were able to do that. I fed them sun up till sundown for the last couple of days and have been able to replace revenue that I would typically get for those that right now are afraid to come downtown.
Julie would like to know, what are your thoughts about education and how can we improve the achievement gap? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh man, that's a loaded question. When it relates to education, first of all, you have communities that have a lack of resources as it relates to what their schools are able to supply within their communities. And so without getting political, you know, we all have our different views on types of schools or, you know, whether you should have charter schools or whether you should have public schools. I think what really does is the most important is making sure that areas where taxes are not contributing significantly to the school's budget, what can those of us who may be outside of those neighborhoods contribute? Because I think a lot of the education gap is not always black and white. It's not so easy, because if you take white children and move them into an area, or Hispanic children that move them into an area where the resources are not there, you're going to see some of the very same gaps in education. And so I think the bigger question is for those of us that are within districts where we have more resources, again, regardless of where you sit from a political perspective, how do you ensure that those that have a lower tax incentive that are going back into those schools, how do we invest in those neighborhoods?
How will your effort intersect with the local Black Love effort, or does it, depending on your focus?
So Black Love is an organization that has very, very similar agenda, and that is to lift up the Black community. And I believe that Black Love's initiative and agenda will be for the Black community forever. I think what Black Love brings that JEDI does not have within its structure or agenda in general is the criminal justice element. That is an extremely important component of combating the inequities within our country. And so I think that they will blend very well in the community, because we need more than one to address the issues that we have.
Larry Sloan says, welcome to our club. What would your advice be today to a young Black female, and likewise to a young Black male? And what would the differences and similarities of that advice be?
What would I say to a young Black male or a young Black female? Well, I think it depends on where they are in life. If I was giving advice to a young Black male who may come from what I consider the hood, I would challenge him and all of his skills and how he might apply them into other areas. And when I say hood, I think of, you know, maybe he might subscribe to a different lifestyle. And I would give that same advice, whether he was Black, white, or from a different race. If they were someone who came from an area where they had more access, I would ask them to be a leader and to be a beacon of hope and light. I would ask them to be a uniter. I would ask them to look at the world through a different lens and to understand not just their lived experience, but the lived experience of their Black brothers and sisters who may not have had the same access that they have had. So it really would depend on what their background is and where they are, because I think advice really does depend on you know, where you are in life.
Address the intersection of your work with United Ways and community foundations to strengthen the response of all of these to institutional racism and systemic change.
Well, I think the first, you know, I want to say this. I respect the organizations that exist, and I respect the allies that we have. But the issue that we are having in America and around the world is how do we prop up more Black leaders? How do we invest in propelling Black leaders and Black women forward? And so, you know, what I think is really important is that while we have these other organizations that are taking place and we have these intersections, where JEDI is unique is you have a Black female founder. And if we're going to begin to actually solve those complexities, then across the board, it's important that we rally behind her, myself, and those that are doing this work to change the narrative that we do not have Black-led or Black leaders that are leading the charge on organizations that can be deemed world-class institutions that have great programs in place, that have ethics in how they deploy and execute, and have transparency in how those dollars are spent.
And last question, how do people of color break that golden ceiling of corporate board membership?
You know, I love this question. There was an article, and I don't know if it was Tops or Business First, but, you know, the thing about our country, you know, and where I ask, you know, again, having a significant other that's white, I enjoy dissecting the white male psyche often. And we have debates of all different sorts, of all different kinds. But the beauty in that is being honest and telling the truth. And even he sometimes has to laugh. There have been, you know, instances where, you know, he's a New Yorker, I'm from New York. So, you know, instant chemistry and very, very blunt individuals. And there were some things that he just didn't believe to be true about being a white male with privilege in America. And there have been days where I came home livid and quite frankly pissed off about something that I knew was a barrier because of the fact that I was Black. And I would send him right back into the same rooms that I just received a no from to get a yes. And so I guess where I'm going with that is that we just have to be honest that most of our institutions around the world, all of our major economic centers are led by white men, predominantly white men, over 85% of them. And so in order for us to break that ceiling is we need white men to say, hey, come here. I want this person to sit in this seat or and have that capacity. I mean, it sounds, you know, kind of simple, but it's really that, it really is. You know, if you think about it, women, when they, through women's suffrage, white women could not grant themselves the right to vote. It took white men to say, you know what, let's let them vote. And then when it was time where Black people through civil rights wanted to vote, it took white people again to say, let them vote. So it's really as simple as our white allies saying, look across the room and saying, you know what, guys, it's too tighty-whitey. It is. So let's put some people in the seat. And if that is a difficult decision for a white person to make, then they need to make the decision to say, maybe it's time, maybe I've, you know, my time is up and it's time for me to step down. And if they cannot do that, then they're okay with what they're seeing happening across the country with the protests. Because I'll tell you, I'm not okay, you know, with watching it. And if you're tired and you're like, God, people, I wish you'd, you know, sit down and, you know, get over it, then you have to put yourself in the skin of a Black person that has been living it their entire life that is also tired. And so we need our allies to just say, you know what, why haven't we put them in the seat?
I have one more question too. With the recent news that there are threats of protests during Derby week in Derby, and a lot of your business is being a business owner downtown too, and with your summits depends a lot on Derby tourist traffic. What do you think of, what are your thoughts on that?
You know, I don't, I believe in freedom of speech. I believe in people's rights to do what it is that they need to do to make their voices heard. I started the Derby Diversity Business Summit because through my own analysis recognized that the largest economic driver for our state had very, very little income flowing into marginalized groups. And so I get it and I do understand. What I would, you know, and Churchill Downs has been a great partner. They are very, very much aware of how much I have voiced and shared with them ways in which we can unite. And so, you know, where I sit on this is I definitely believe in freedom of speech peacefully. I'm not looking for anyone to get hurt, but I also think that leaders need to lead. And if there is an opportunity to sit down and have discussions with the parties to be, or to invest in areas that make everyone feel that they belong, then our leaders should absolutely do that.
Thank you, Tawana. And we're still waiting on your membership.
I will be joining you all.
Wonderful. That's really good news. We're so appreciative of your time and your excellent presentation. There are a number of comments that have been made, and we just are so, like I said, appreciative of your support. We'll get the information. It's on everybody's through the emails. If you want to continue the conversation with Tawana, please do. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to engage. And we thank you for your leadership, for your bold leadership, and for us to be able to have this frank discussion. It means a lot to all of us at the Rotary Club. So as we end this wonderful program, I also want to invite folks to consider who you're going to invite for the business synergy events. There was an email that was sent out that lists all of those. It's really easy to do. You just click your mouse on it and you can register. But thinking of people that we can bring into the club. And Tawana, I think you really hit the nail on the head. We need to think of who else do we need to come together and reach out to folks so we can communicate just how much we desire to be a united community, one that has great progress for all citizens. So be thinking of that, Rotarians, on how we can expand, and we're thrilled that you'll become a new member. That means a lot to our group, and thank you so much. With that, we are going to adjourn the meeting, and you all have a wonderful week ahead. Bye-bye.
Bye.